This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
Today I have an extraordinary guest to introduce you to, and it's really just an honor and pleasure. Let me give you a brief backdrop here. I've known Cass Phelps for less than a month, and it's really something, at least above board. Cass Phelps and I didn't know so much about each other, or maybe zero about each other, until just a couple weeks ago when I was in a workshop that he held. What was really interesting about that workshop is I was notified through 3 different people that I needed to meet this man called Cass Phelps. And, it comes from Alexandra, it comes from Sam Morris, Cass. It comes from a few different people who, let me know that my time was now to meet Cass. And so when I finally met him online for this incredible workshop that he led, I was able to let him know that. And then we've had a couple very powerful conversations, both before this call today and at the end of his workshop a few weeks ago. So I am super excited, super enthusiastic to introduce you, my listeners, and Cass, your listeners, to, whatever comes unfolded today. And so welcome to Humanity, Cass Phelps. It's just an honor and pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you, Fred. It's really nice to be here. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
It's really spectacular. Each and every one of us is really dealing with something, right? No matter whether we're tackling some of the big problems in the world or maybe even the tiny ones, we all face challenges. Now, I've been a psychiatrist for many years, and I've worked with all kinds of people from all walks of life. I've worked with more people than I can really count, from various backgrounds, dealing with more issues than you can imagine, of all sizes and shapes. So naturally, over time, I've developed a number of ways to assist others in gaining a new sense of freedom and empowerment. Now, I'm pulling back the curtain on one of those methodologies, and I'm going public, revealing the process and associated mindset that contributed to using this particular method with maximum effectiveness. It's all laid out in my new book called Creative 8, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. You can pick this book up on Amazon.com in either Kindle or paperback format. And as a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I'd like to offer you a completely free copy in audiobook format. Just go to welcometohumanity.net/creative and download your free audiobook copy of Creative 8 today. I really look forward to hearing about your Creative 8 breakthrough. Now, let's get back to this amazing conversation. Welcome to humanity. Cass, I have this first question that I like to ask people. And, Cass didn't prepare for this, which I kind of told him not to. So he did great in preparing by not preparing. Mm-hmm. I have this question. It's less than 10 letters long. It's a full question, and it's less than 10 letters that are utilized in the question. And yet it's a vast open-ended question that takes on at least the possibility of beginning a great conversation. So here we go. So Cass, who are you?
Who am I? Such a good question.
I know you're multidimensional in a lot of ways. So go ahead and pick any of them, and I won't restrict the road to whatever you say here.
Yeah. First, I'm a spirit. I'm a human being having a experience of being alive here on planet Earth and doing my best to stay human in that experience in our culture. My experience of myself is more spirit than matter. And so much of myself is to be here now in the earth, in the world. So the question is really interesting because I feel like I am the awareness, I am the being, and then I'm all the different characters that come into this moment, really. So I'd say I'm a dancer.
Oh, the awareness, the being, and all the different characters, that's who you're dancing. I say I'm a dancer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're looking at being really what sounds like is like an interdimensional dancer. Right? Like you're dancing in between all these dimensions. You're putting together all the characters, all the experiences, not only your experience, right? We're talking about the experience, not only this thing we call you, not that experience, but really the experiences of your entire entire existence, and you're dancing with all of this as a human. Is this fair to
Mhm.
say, or can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I feel today who I am, where I am, is a participant in being a part of our ecosystem. And so I feel that what I'm bringing is my essence, my own signature of that feels to me like creation created. So my work has been to go inward and really know my essence, feel it, feel my signature so that I can show up in the world and play the roles and dance the dance and be the mover that I'm here to be.
Beautiful. Well, recently, some recent podcasts have had some terrific creative artists on it. And, I really get now that you've used the phrase dancing, and I know a little bit about a tiny bit, really a very small sprinkling of what your work is up to or what your work is about. Can you say a little bit about the movement work and the dancing work that really is your life's work as I see it right now? A little bit about who you are and what you do in that area.
Yeah, so the movement work that I offer is based in what I refer to as biological movement, which means that we're not moving in linear cultural movement. We're studying the origins of impulses. So all of the different forms of movement like dance or Tai Chi or yoga or Qigong or any type of somatic therapeutic type of movement, it all came out of what I refer to as biological or organic movement. And so my work and my teacher who basically roped me in 23 years ago in Continuum, her work was to go in and listen to these original impulses of movement in our bodies. And that is a very energetic experience for me, these impulses and following them. So a lot of it is about just listening and then from there letting coherent movement come. So what I tell people is it's like being moved and being breathed as opposed to thinking a movement and doing a movement.
Mm-hmm. One thing I'm noticing, and I think I'm speaking probably for some of our listeners, is sort of the poetic liberty you're taking with some of these verbs, like listening to the impulse, listening, for instance, like listening to the impulse, and then, the biological organic movements that predate all the organized movements that are presently in place to steady us or to focus us, the Tai Chi or the Qigong or the yoga or, like those things you're saying are an outgrowth of what it is that you have been studying and then what you deliver for us. Yes, what you have here predates that. I guess that's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, so that we're listening to our own natural impulses versus placing something on top of us. And that's where our authenticity, can have access to, at least I can speak for myself, I can have access to my own spirit, my own nature, my own authenticity. And that builds my capacity to hold all parts of myself versus feeling like I have to fit in to a structure.
It's super interesting to me. So I really get, and maybe it grows out of our conversation just a few moments ago, this idea of, no attachments. Like you don't have to do yoga the right way. This isn't that. And you don't have to do the movements that you're talking about the right way. It's a matter of catching up with those movements, maybe listening to those impulses and then letting them occur and being breathed or being moved or those kinds of things by some sort of internal vital influence called life. Or what is driving my movements? What is driving what I might hear if I listen closely?
Yeah, exactly. That to me is the exploration, to get to know that, to have the right container and the right environment that feels safe enough where we can go in and actually discover that. And so one of the things that I say is, for me, is that pleasure or positive sensation can be an incredible guide. And I'm not talking about overt pleasure. I'm talking about like tracking something that feels naturally fulfilling in our movement and also in our breath. And then within that, our emotions. And so that we can actually feel an innate intelligence within our tracking of pleasure or our tracking of positive sensation. The more that I do that, the more that I notice that I'm being guided by an intelligence that moves me towards life, moves me towards expansion, innovation, evolution, versus like a downgrade into redundant, repetitive, limited, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a freedom here you're speaking towards. There's a
Yep.
freedom of just sheer authenticity that's at the roots of what you're talking about. That is rather than really what I think, like there's a default, it seems like, Cass. The default is not what you're talking about, that it actually takes a stripping or an unconcealing or a revealing of what's driving this whole life thing forward to even address this. And then you really do take bold liberties to redefine words that we already thought we knew we were talking about when we said them, and then, reapply them to gain access to a level of core humanity, I think, through the movements. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, like you said, if we take back all of these words and principles and ideas and concepts, if we take them back for ourselves and take them into our own exploration, we become self-referencing. We develop a capacity to feel what feels right and true for us, which lives inside of us. We all have that, but our culture creates a kind of noise and demand for fitting in and for, getting with the program and creating like these extremes and polarities that we're seeing in the world now. So for me, the idea is about going in and reclaiming ourselves and allowing all of who we are to have freedom to move and breathe and express so that we can get to know ourselves.
It's amazing. So look, I think you're talking to each and every one of us. This isn't a special skill that only the creamy humans have access to. This isn't a luxury. This is actually what's driving each and every individual soul, right? I mean, I have a body here.
Yeah, I feel that that's what we're doing, whether we're aware of it or not. That the fact that we're alive. Yeah, and that's what I'm feeling that you're naming as well, is just the fact that we're here, that question of like what motivates us, what drives us, to really understand that for ourselves so that we can actually be in coherent relationships with appearing other.
Right. There's this idea of taking on the idea, how do I do something? Like, how do I do it? How do I do it? Well, do it like me might be an answer, right? Like, I should do yoga like a yogi. And I should do Tai Chi, like a master. And really, I think what you're suggesting is doing it like anyone else isn't necessarily the access. It's in fact a booby trap towards homogeneity, perhaps, but it's not access to, I guess, in some degree. I have to say, having our video workshop a few weeks ago, watching you do whatever you do opens up a lot of doors immediately for any of the participants or your students or the people who are in this course with you, because we get to see the fluidity of what might be available. Sam told me when he met Emily that he had never seen anything like her in his life. And I imagine that that's your state as well with her, having studied with her so long. That she was like an octopus, but even an octopus on steroids, that she could do stuff that like her body would just be
morph.
Who she was as a human was just blew him away. I mean, he, like many others, moved to Southern California to study with her.
Yeah.
Like you too, I guess, in some ways. And what is that? What is it where is the misconception? Why is it that I might not have? What's in my way? What is more seductive? What is taking me down a false or maybe that's not so much like a deceptive pathway of my individuation that isn't this, like I'm going to, right? That's what I want to know. Why am I drawn away from this if this is so pure and supreme?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I feel like there's a general answer, and then we each want to look at what that is so that we can actually create a clear path for ourselves to rediscover who we are. And what I see is that there is a distraction, that our culture is created for consumerism and also for a specific type of linear function, which is important, but without having a deeper biological, fluid understanding of our human nature, if you look into nature and you just watch how the elements themselves move and how it is that all of those elements play and dance together to create forms, there's always fluidity in them. So, but what happens in our culture is rightfully so about stability because it's predictable and it creates safety. The issue is that to become overstabilized, and that's really the issue, and that becomes a distraction. And so when we study fluid movement or we study flow, movement that has flow in it, flow is like the middle path. Flow is where all the different structures and forms and elements can come together to create coherency. So when you look at a baby, for example, when a baby is first born, they've been living in this fluid matrix, this fluid system. And so their body isn't stabilized yet. And you watch them breathe and you can see the diaphragm is moving like a jellyfish and it's pulsing and like all the fluid in their whole body is alive. And if you pick that baby up, you will be moved to move with them because the force of the flow that they're in. And so then gradually what happens is we start to stabilize. And as we try to stabilize in our culture, the culture says, get more linear. And so what that does for our human development is it creates a need for secondary systems like we're creating to have the space to evolve, to bring in the fluid, to bring in the organic movement, to bring these things in so that we still have choice.
That's amazing and very interesting. And it isn't like, I guess, is it like that the linearity that then becomes demanded of us as infants and then beyond, further amplified by what's requested and required in order to supposedly be a functional adult in this astral plane? I mean, there's something about the linearity that's juxtaposed, that's actually counterbalancing, and in some ways, like as a distraction, taking away from our access of the biological and organic sources of our movements that are here for us to gather. Is that fair? And is that a possible conjecture to consider?
I think it's something to consider for sure. The way you're articulating it is really important. It feels like you're naming something important. And the thing is that for everybody who's listening to this, something that's really important to know is that the cognitive mind doesn't really want to be a part of anything that it can't control. This is a really important thing to understand, that our strategic thinking process that we've developed as human beings to be able to create structures and forms, the cognitive mind has been shaped so far to not put value on something that's fluid or something that flows if it can't control it.
That's just incredible. And that's what we have to use as our primary, maybe by default, that's what we have to use as our primary source of taking in and then exploring the world around us. A cognitive domination in some ways. Yeah.
And that's why my experience is that's why we're experiencing the polarity and the dualism and the struggle between tribes, between parties, all of these different things, because we're over rigidifying and we're missing the point that we're all connected and that we are a part of our ecosystem. So one of the ways that this becomes meaningful is when somebody has a traumatic experience that they need to resolve, or something, or an injury, something that requires the biological intelligence and the biological field to come back into equilibrium or to come back into function. That's when the cognitive mind becomes curious because it has a need for it. So usually we don't see the value of natural organic process unless we've lost function and we've lost choice. And that's a process. So for example, most people who have like a nervous breakdown, just to put this out there, that breakdown comes from exhaustion of overfunction. It comes from overfunction where they've overstabilized and they've ignored what's happening in their nervous system. So they reach exhaustion, which means they lose their ability to process information. And that's what we're talking about. So if we bring in fluid movement, we start to raise our capacity for influence, to receive more information that then starts to influence our perception of who we are and what the world is.
Beautiful. There's like a surrender of the
Mhm.
cognitive mind at some level of, beyond the straw that breaks its back. There's something like, okay, the cognitive mind almost gets that it has no recourse. It has nothing to like, okay, and leans on then the organic and natural movement or more sourceful movement that I think we're speaking around
Mhm.
to guide its principles. I suppose with the hope that it would eventually learn how to control it as a result of that contribution from the other
Yeah.
aspect of ourselves.
Yes, but this is the beauty, and this is what took over my life, is that once we have a taste for life force in its purity and we can feel it moving in our bodies, there's a waking up that happens where we realize that we are not just our cognitive mind.
Mm-hmm.
And intuition, and like I said earlier, of like, who am I can feel myself as essence, as life force, as spirit, not limited to just being a cognitive cognizer. And so that's the infection that happens when we go into a practice that's based in organic biological movement, is that it wakes something up in us. You could speak to that during our workshop. That something gets awoken, then you're like, I know this, I remember this, I'm here now. Oh yeah. And so
I'm back.
I'm back.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And you've mentioned it's not just movement. So people, this is an auditory show, so people are kind of imagining what it is that we're talking about. But you also mentioned breathing as being a very critical piece to this with the baby, and even as you say, movement and breathing, or being breathed, for instance. So how we breathe, and maybe you can assist me to understand where you place the act of breathing, which doesn't necessarily seem to be very voluntary. However, once that is said, and I start doing some, Wim Hof breathing, or when I start doing some breath work, I start getting that I have access to my breathing in ways that I didn't know I had either.
Yes.
Like there's a core source at the bottom of my breathing that has it be that I make decisions to breathe to some degree. And how does that interface with the organicity versus this default cognition? And how do I access it? And how does it work with the dance of life, or the interdimensional dance of all these components? Where does breathing fit in, Cass?
Oh, Fred, you're amazing. I just love that. That whole question is just amazing. Thank you so much for opening that up. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So structured breath, like Wim Hof and those types of forms, they are to gain a specific result, right? So they give us access to where breath is it's the medium, it's like the middle control mechanism for being able to manage and modulate the mind, as well as our thoughts, as well as our body. So breath is like that middle man. So for somebody who wants to gain more control specifically of a function of their mind, or, in the old schools, like the yogic schools, all of those old traditions of like mind over matter, that breath can be used that way. There's that. Now, this is the thing that's really interesting. When you remove structures out of the body by creating fluid movement, by breaking up patterns that are about overfunction, you take a space where you open the body. What can happen from there is an organic breath can emerge that actually is coming from a deeper place of our natural organic origins. And so what that means,
this is an entirely different quality of breath that is like unsuspecting. That type of breath, you're like from a place that I didn't know existed. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, got
and
it.
So like one of the ways to think about it is that the whole body is breathing, that the cells are breathing, and that breath is also movement. So, and this becomes really interesting if you are somebody who wants to explore innovating and evolution as well as healing, where you want to come into a higher function in your own system. So there is an intelligence that lives in our bodies that knows how to heal, how to grow, how to evolve. Have you ever seen a bee or an insect or any type of animal that is like broke its wing or broken something on it? It will go into a breathing that is the force of life, creating transformation and transmutation. And that breath is not linear. It doesn't have like a circular rhythm or a specific pattern to it. It's non-linear. So the breath itself comes in as intelligence and starts actually pulling together the organism and the mind and every part of this our human system starts pulling it together to create this mutation, to create this transformation. But the thing is that it can be tricky for people to access because of the patterning that we have. So it takes time to sort of remove the obstacles to get to this organic breath. It's one of the reasons why we don't see it like as this mainstream in the world, is because it's like a secret. It's like this hidden messenger that lives in our bodies that's waiting. And for example, for those of you who know Sam, you were referencing him earlier, Fred. Sam is someone who was in a major accident that brushed his spine. And while he was waiting for the ambulance, Sam shared this. The only thing that he heard or felt in that moment was, let your breath guide you, breathe. And he felt that force come in and breathe his system. Yeah.
I take a deep breath before I speak, and I really notice, and I'm going to be with Sam tomorrow at 2:00. We start looking here at, so we were at a hot springs, and we're going back actually tomorrow up here in Northern California, a well-known one. And we took a walk and we ran into a flock, I guess they're called, a flock of quails. And then over there, we saw some woodpeckers. And then we did see some bees. And then we saw this little, this yellow belly sparrow. And, we saw these animals and they're so gorgeous inside their natural habitat. Like they're so drawing, it's like, wow, look at how it dances and what its flight pattern is and how it takes care of itself. And also look at it breathe. Oh, and Cass, on this walk, we look down. Alexandra, she's amazing, as you know. She looks down and says, look at that. And I see a little log, a little tiny twig, like 6 inches or so long. And then I realized no log there. That is some lizard, newt, salamander thing. And and that's what it was. It was like frozen. It was, 35 or 40, 50 degrees. I don't know. And it was frozen there and completely camouflaged inside inside actual twigs of its very similar size and girth. And the only way I knew that this thing wasn't a log after all was I saw it breathe. Like that's not what a log does.
Yeah.
So what is the purpose of our breath? What is this point? Why does the world stop when a bee loses its wing or when a bird breaks a leg, or like what then kicks in that has this organic, or when Sam's on an ambulance bed, really?
Yeah.
What kicks in then that says, okay, cognition, you are not what we're after right now. Okay, regular, thought of movements or ordered cascades that maybe learned movements. That's not what we're calling for now. There is an organic biological breath that takes us on then.
Yeah.
Why?
Why? That's such a good question. I think if we look at what it is that's breathing in that moment, that's pure life force.
Right.
And that's spirit. That's what I would refer to as spirit or essence. And so that pure life force, why is so that life can go on.
So that life can go on. And I kind of knew I was leading you down that hole. And then the next question is, well, some people call call that survival.
Mm-hmm.
But survival has, to me, a connotation of like desperation,
Mm-hmm.
like I'll do anything to survive kind of,
Mm-hmm.
like all else fails, all I have left is to survive kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's not what you're speaking to. There's some alacrity and aliveness inside of the life force so that life can go on.
Mm-hmm.
Do
Yeah,
you get what I'm
exactly.
saying? And not
Absolutely.
survival as a desperate term.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the intelligence of life growing. And so, like, the examples that we're giving are like when there is a demand to survive, and that life force is coming forward and saying, not today, not on my watch. This is happening. We're healing this. We're innovating. We're growing.
Mm-hmm.
If we take that same intelligence out of the need to survive, and we look at how that force is guiding everything in our ecosystem and everything that's moving, we can see that breath, it's all breathing. And that within that, the force of nature itself is what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I suspect, again, a little esoteric and pushing a little bit, that those logs, those twigs, those, when they were on the tree, but in fact, maybe even off the tree, have their own breath, dare I say, associated with them.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they do. And the brilliance of that is that we all play our part in the ecosystem, and we all have a specific role. So we actually breathe their exhale and they breathe our inhale, and the story goes on.
It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful.
It is beautiful. And I'd like to even, here's a hug for you. And it's like, oh, Cass, thanks for exploring this with me during this lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Like what kind of gift it is to explore this in conversation
Mm-hmm.
by using words that are driven simply by the bellows of my breathing machine, after all. Right? That's all this is. All I'm really doing and all you're really responding to is breathing with it while moving moving an organ or two in between the source of my breathing and whatever gets expelled as noise that you then get to interpret.
Yeah.
But it's really in the communication of our breathing that we're doing here.
Yeah.
Talking and breathing aren't very far away from each other, after all.
No, they aren't. In fact, we are structuring our breath right now through language. And the most beautiful thing for me, and this happened in my healing process because I had a very traumatic experience that I needed to resolve, and it brought me deeper into this listening of this intelligence and the autonomic system that lives in our bodies. The whole point of the breath, what commands the breath is the heart. And so the beating of the heart is what causes the diaphragm to pulse. And I've had that direct experience. I've gotten slowed down enough where I could actually feel that happening, the signal from the heart to create the movement of the diaphragm to get the whole thing going. It's like a profound, beautiful experience if we want to experience it. Either way, it's already happening.
This morning, in my morning breath work this morning, there's a head heart. We did a little head heart exercise, 5 breaths in and out, with our hands on our heart, and really for me, it's one of the beautiful parts of this particular exercise is just getting the essence of my heart at the centrality of who I get to be as a living human being, I have other parts of my body that would just assume take over and be, whether it's my head or my groin or other aspects that are willing to take charge, eager to take charge, in fact. But there's something about the heart. And I have to say, Cass, given the conversation that we've had, the 35 minutes of conversation that we've had up till this point, it seems very bold and audacious to suggest that there's even a lower level, that there's even a more fundamental level of what's driving breath, and that being the heartbeat, or that being the heart at the centrality. And that's and to say it with authority, right? I mean, you're kind of saying, no, I've been there. I got this. This isn't a maybe thing. This is an experiential, a reference to an experiential truth for you that the heart is driving this.
Yeah. And this, I mean, it's the chicken and the egg in the organism, because the organism never divides. It operates as a whole. And that again is part of the intelligence that we're tapping into. And, but this is the thing that I love. And what's coming out now is that we can feel these things, but now science is proving a lot And one of the things that science is able to point to is that the heart has its own brain tissue, and that the heart is actually, that brain tissue is, that neural tissue is such a communicator to the rest of the organism. And so this goes back to where we started of this idea of like being trapped in linear strategic thinking versus heart thinking.
Now, heart thinking, one of the things that I guess I'm hearing here is that I was going to reference this earlier, but I just want to make certain, it's not linear, but then you said you included in linear circular. Like circular is another, I thought I heard you sort of throw that into the same basket. Like circular is just another version of linear, and, except it's circular. And that there's, and I thought we might go to spiral because people really talk, how each and every movement in the end is, I've heard many people speak to the notion that it tends to be spiral in nature.
Yeah.
But that's not the movement you're talking about here in the heart either. Or is it? Is the heart a spiral moving organ?
It's an interesting inquiry. So what I can experience with the heart is that it involutes in its pumping style. So it has fluidity and it has spiraling. It even has circular movement in it. There's repetition, but the point is that it's involuting in on itself to create its pump. And within that, it's drawing everything in and then gushing everything out. And that having that experience in our bodies as an experience, it's an intelligence that teaches us about recycling. For example, the sun follows that same movement. It's how the sun creates all of its light, is through this imploding, involuting. The womb, when it's creating the baby, or the cell as it's creating its coherent structure, that circular adaptive plasticity, it's all about an involuting style versus this forced expansion. The expansion happens from involuting, turning in on itself.
Fascinating. Totally.
So I just had the other thing I wanted to add to that, which is that points to back to what we were saying about knowing ourselves, that to involute in on ourselves, to swallow our own tail, so to speak, to have an internalized experience that creates a direct knowing. That's why oftentimes I think women have more of an experience of their bodies because of their monthly cycle, their menstrual cycle. They're always being taken inward and having to listen.
Yeah, they have an extra edge in that maybe they would, the listeners may not think that that's such an advantage. And at the same time, there's something like another access to a regular rhythmic involution as a natural way of life.
Yes. Yeah. Well said.
So this is going back to the 7.8 billion of us who don't have to be special to access what you're talking about. You see, because one thing I know is that of those 7.8 billion who are presently alive on the planet, 100% of them have a beating heart.
Yeah.
So with that, 100% are experiencing from within this involution as source of the ongoing nature of the life force. 100% of all people, like seriously, of course, I know it sounds silly, but I'm not referencing the silliness of it. I'm referencing that each and every human has access to this sort of baseline foundation of the beauty of the life force with each, every 5 seconds or so, a full beat takes place.
Yeah. And also, like you're saying with that, is that we are all breathing, and which means that we can all understand the inhaling, the receiving of life, and then the expression of life in the exhale. And these are motifs, these are themes that we're all doing every day. And so just if we all closed our eyes for a moment and just experience that inhale of this moment and feel the beating of the heart in this moment, and what the exhale, how it wants to exhale, that's a process that we're all in, and that can be a unifying meditation.
What we're talking about here is taking that line, the warring factions that you spoke of earlier, inside of humanity, inside of, human to human agitated interfaces that have been created in sort of the imbalance of us not accessing what we share as unifying life driving principles. There's an access, kind of forgot where I was headed here, but there's an access. Yeah, go ahead.
You named something that just kind of stopped everything. Unifying principles, unifying life principles. Is that what you said?
Yes. Yes. Unifying
So,
life sourcing principles. Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, like you just basically named something, just was like, what? Well, that's it. That's what we're
Yeah.
talking about.
It is what we're talking about. I think, and thanks for bringing that up, because here's what my point is. That it becomes available is we become one there, that there's no
Mhm.
source of infighting that can be based on that, the fact is each and every one of us breathes and has a heart beating.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
therefore we are sourced by that, and therefore we share that, and therefore that's the reference point from which we dance interdimensionally with each other. That's what
Yeah.
happens.
Yes. Yeah,
And
exactly.
the linearity of cognition that you suggested earlier is causing the infighting or the warring factions inside of humanity as we find ourselves in so many critical spaces in life now, is something that, well, is it fair to say that this could be combated or this could be transformed if we were to come true to our life force and the heartbeat and breath that drives itself through those things?
I mean, that would be amazing. And I do feel that that is a potential. And because when we turn inward and we listen to our organic rhythms, we sense that everyone else is in that. But what I'm saying is there's empathy.
Exactly.
And yeah. And empathy is the one thing that actually helps us break through the defense mechanisms of dualism. And like when I look at a leader, I often wonder how much they feel and what their empathy is. And I think that that's actually what defines a leader versus anything else, is their capacity to consider and what everyone else is feeling and how it is that we can all function together.
There's a phrase I have heard and like to use is to take into consideration the concerns of all relevant parties and all, including the adversarial relevant parties, like really, really get it. And again, doesn't that go back to what we spoke of with Welcome to Humanity, that that's the essence here, is to get it all, like get it all, get every piece of it, including the unacceptable aspects or including the ones that don't necessarily fit your present model, as being worthwhile to empathize with or unify with, or without agreeing. You really don't have to agree after all. Agreeing is not a requirement. You don't have to.
Yeah. And to me, the biofield, the natural order, this force that we're speaking to and about, that is a commonality that we all share. So we don't have to necessarily have an agreement about dogma and concepts and religion and spirituality. Like we don't have to agree on any of that. What we can agree on is what we all share.
Exactly.
Which is this life force. And we know that if we slow down and we can all actually feel that as a reference. So like, for example, what's happening in the world right now with the pandemic and everything is that most people are getting triggered in survival fear. And I mean, we're talking like implicit survival, like deep, deep fundamental things that we've never experienced before, because we've never lived in a time where, the world is like cracking open and, forming new, mountains and islands and all that. So like a pandemic like this is waking something up in our prehistoric survival, and it's triggering everyone. So what that means is that I'm a somatic therapist, so I spend a lot of my time working with people one-on-one. And since this has started, my work has quadrupled. I get literally emails every day, people saying, please, can you do a session with me? But the point is that the reason why they want to do a session with me is because I'm holding the biofield. I'm not holding a political party. I'm not holding a science party. Like I have no agenda other than to hold the foundation of what brings us back to our referencing of our own truth.
So the survival fear leads to a surrender, which then, kind of like we spoke of with the cognitive realm, which then allows people to get, okay, that this isn't about politics anymore. This isn't about religion anymore. This isn't about an agreement reality anymore. And if the force that's driving me to keep my life alive is in the biosphere, it's in then I'm going to seek out a master of that or someone who can speak to that. And there you go. To me, it seems entirely consistent with the world around me that your work would quadruple and that the demand for you would quadruple at this time. Like a surrender to linearity. Like, no. Linearity realizes that it's in over its head in this one. And
Yeah.
off it comes is towards you.
Yeah. And because ultimately what we need right now is critical thinking, our ability to take in information and critically analyze it. But for that to happen, we have to have a reference point that's based in a deeper understanding of life force, of what it is how we're actually going to evolve as humanity. And so we can't really do that without including nature, because otherwise we have no reference point. We have no way to critically analyze information. There's nothing in our base beings that can say, no, that's not right, if we're not in our base being.
Exactly. Cass, what else do you do? First of all, is there such thing as not doing this? In other words, I was going to say, what else do you do when you're not doing this? So what else do you do when you're not working? What else do you do when you're not, doing this movement stuff, or when you're not doing this breathing, this life stuff? Like, what else drives you? What's important to you? What might our listeners learn about Cass Phelps that isn't really all about this? And by the way, if it's all about this, then say that. It really might be. And I'd be curious to your answer. Like, if we were to lighten this up somehow, where would you pick from? What low hanging branch would you pick from that tells who you are?
Okay, so for me, I'm usually at the beach, or I'm in the forest. I live on Kauai, so it's 95% nature here. So I'm pretty much just that, or listening to music, or painting, drawing. Just enjoying the creative process and nature. Yeah, and then of course enjoying just having conversations with people like you and interacting with people. Yeah, playing.
How might our listeners who don't already know this, how might our listeners find you or get involved with what you're up to, or follow you, or learn about you, or speak to you? How might they contact you?
Yeah, I've got the website. We could post the link if they wanted it. And
it'll
then,
be here.
Yep. Yeah. And then if you wanted to see some ideas of the movement, just to see what nonlinear movement looks like, or the meditative practice of it, you can go to the YouTube channel. I can give you that. So it's just my name, Cass Phelps. If you just go to YouTube, type in my name, that will come up. Yeah. And then also there's, starting in January, we're doing a 12-week program where we're really working with bringing in the focus on our own essence, on our own nature. And I call it the gift process. And that's where we spend, Sundays, a couple hours every week, and then have some home play of where we're really creating this solid container for ourselves to experience our own innate gifts and our own essence for ourselves, so that we kind of like step out of culture and start to discover who we are without any overlay.
It's awesome. Well, first of all, thank you for doing that. Second of all, I can't wait to get the information and join you for those weeks. It really sounds beautiful. Terrific. Awesome.
Yeah, that would be fun.
As we talked about earlier, the hour goes fast and we're ready to taper down. Is there anything you want to say in closing? Anything to our listeners, to me, to you, any kind of things you caught up with here that you want to declare? Anything at all?
To me, I really feel like it comes down to this really sense of self-love, that we choose to take care of ourselves, and within that we can take care of each other. So to really demystify what self-love is, to spend the time to actually discover what that is for ourselves, so that it's not a mystery. And to me, that's being really authentic with who we really are, all of parts of ourselves like you've named, and embracing them.
You know how a day unfolds, and if you're listening, then there's themes, right? Like in fact, you and I, this is the third time I think that I felt that with you. It's like, oh yeah, you should know that within about 2 minutes of waking up this morning, I was kicking around that exact thought, and that the day this morning has been defined in exploring exactly this, like self-love, so that I can then love and care for others. And what does that mean? Well, it means really the essence of exquisite self-love, not just sort of, not lukewarm, not like almost, not like, government work, like precision self-love that's here and available for us, so that we can be functional contributions to ourselves and others. Like that's really one of the things we really can do.
Yeah, it is. And like when we look into the world and we're like, well, what do we do? It does point to this turning inward and building that muscle, you know? Yeah.
Fabulous.
It's beautiful the way you said that.
Likewise to you. Thank you. All right. Well, I think it is a good time, if there is such a thing, to wind down now. We'll have more conversations certainly over time. I just thank you for sharing yourself with me and then for allowing us to share this conversation with others.
Mm-hmm.
It really is the essence of, I feel very lucky to have the brand name Welcome to Humanity, because it's just like, it might be on the gravestone when this whole thing is over. That might be all that's there,
Yes. Yeah.
And those are 3 words. There you go. Thank you. We have had a great conversation. Listeners, thank you for hanging around till the end here and for enjoying Cass Phelps with me. What a beautiful man, right? And it's really, really been a pleasure. I get to walk tall for the rest of this day, and I get to really, as the year turns over now, I get to really add this as part of who I am and part of what we're creating, or what we or all of us are creating, not only for the rest of the afternoon and not even for the year, but for the life in front of us that now sits here with new and changing challenges, but always with the same foundational resources available to us. And I think that's what we've really been dancing around today, Cass. So thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing with me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Fred. I have so much respect for you. It's just a real pleasure to feel how powerful you are and to feel it, you teasing out these dialogues. I really appreciate it.
Truly my honor. And we'll catch you on the flip side. Have a happy new year, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you, listeners. Take care. I love you. Welcome to Humanity. And wow, was that awesome with Cass or not? I mean, my goodness, he's so soft and so sweet and so smart. And please check out his YouTube. I mean, my God, the guy is amazing. And what gets delivered in simply watching is an opportunity, like he said about the baby, an opportunity to feel yourself becoming liquid just by watching him, and really, really coming to grips with the fluidity of who we are as humans and what that really means for all of us as we have a shared consciousness. Absolutely astonishing. Love talking to Cass Phelps. And maybe when you were listening, you were thinking of a person or maybe a group of people that could really benefit from hearing this episode. So go ahead and reach out to them and invite them to listen and to subscribe and to leave a review for Welcome to Humanity, because after all, it is subscriptions and reviews that drive the whole possibility of having more listeners for the Welcome to Humanity podcast. So make sure you subscribe yourself if you're not subscribed, and I would be truly grateful for that level of support. To catch up with past episodes, and you would get those, of course, if you did subscribe, but to catch up, you can go right over now to welcometohumanity.net/podcast. So until next time, this is Dr. Fred, and it's been another wonderful edition of Welcome to Humanity podcast. Thank you for listening. Have a beautiful day. Have a beautiful life. Welcome to Humanity.